Welcome everybody who is here today. Welcome to the future folks who are watching the recording. You are joining us for a conversation about a fabulous book, not only about Fluent Bit, but also about Kubernetes and plenty about logs and events. Today, I am going to be your host, Paige Cruz. We will be talking with the creator of Fluent Bit, Eduardo Silva, if you want to give a hello, and the author of this book, Phil Wilkins. Good morning, afternoon to you both. How are you feeling today?
We're good.
Perfect. Well, today we want to start with a little bit of an icebreaker. We'll go a little easy and then we'll ease into those deeper topics. So, to start us off, what is your favorite Fluent Bit plugin and why? There's a lot of plugins to choose from. Sometimes folks don't know, so let's highlight some of your favorites. Phil, why don't you get started?
Okay, so I have to admit I couldn't choose one. I've got two. Um, I like
Perfect.
the Lua filter.
Blue
I
filter.
come from a developer background, so any problem I can't fix with a tool, I'm sure I can cut a few lines of code to deal with it. And the other one I like is HTTP because there is so many systems we can connect together into the Fluent ecosystem over the HTTP connectivity. So it makes it for a very powerful channel, and we've demoed that in the past, doing some funky things with connecting um, Fluent Bit with Slack and creating a chat up style functionality.
Ooh, that sounds very interesting. I'm sure many of us are running Slack in our organizations today. I hadn't even thought about the power of Slack plus Fluent Bit. Hmm. So you went for the broad and the flexible, the customizable plugins. Eduardo, can you pick just one of your favorites? You cannot say they're all your favorites. Oh, and you are muted.
Mute. Thank you. So my favorite one is std out. I'm a printf guy, so yeah, since I'm developing the stuff, I need to see what's going on if the data is formatted correctly. So std out is my day by day.
Classic.
Yeah.
That is where we all get started with logging. One of our colleagues, John Patokny, loves to say, "What is Hello World if not the first log line that you ever write as a developer?" I agree. We've got one more fun question, which is in all of the years of developing Fluent and helping folks get stood up with Fluent and better, more efficient logging, I am sure you have seen some wacky use cases. Can you think of some scenarios or places people are trying to use Fluent that has surprised you over the years? Eduardo, if you look like you're going through a Rolodex of scenarios.
Well, I have seen use cases since hey, I'm using Fluent Bit to gather metrics for my garden because I connected Raspberry Pi, I'm connecting the sensors. And in the past, also we used to support, I don't know if you are aware about what the XBs are. The XB is
No.
a special protocol and there's small devices. It's kind
Okay.
of Bluetooth, but for very home automation mostly. XB is
Okay.
used everywhere on that, right? So we used to have an XB plugin, right? While back in FluentBit because it was created for embedded Linux, so we wanted to connect remote devices, right? So people start experimenting with sensors and different stuff. And at some
Oh,
point, when we pivot to the cloud, we said, hey, maybe XB is not a thing. We
yeah.
put a release on GitHub. Hey, is everybody using it now? Oh, nobody took a look at the issue, and hey, we just dropped it, right? But that was one. And one of the most recent changes in FluentBit and in the scope for one use case has been like XYZ company in the real world that makes thousands, if not millions of cars says, oh, we're running FluentBit in our fleet. What? Yeah, we are running a couple of operating systems. So we're sending telemetry data. And now we have this fancy use case where we want to send the videos recorded by the car to the cloud. It
Oh
was
my
like,
God. Fluent Bit on the road, coming soon to a road near you, or already there, it sounds like. Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
I want to files, right? Big files and send it to a cloud with zero copy strategy and that stuff. But I'm sure that there's many, many others that I cannot remember at this moment. Yeah.
Phil, that was great. From local, my home garden to cars driving all over freeways and highways. We can see how flexible Fluent Bit is already just from those two environments that it's been successful in. Phil, do you have a standout, interesting use case you've seen people try to shoehorn for Fluent Bit?
And I can't match that at all. I have to admit, most of my applications have been a lot more mundane. I think that the most interesting application we've used Fluent Bit for was I was building a proof of concept and a demo to show APIs and make it engaging. So we were flying quadcopter drones, little drones,
Okay.
through and piloting them using just APIs. So we were monitoring the little application that was talking back and forth with the drone and collecting its trace information.
Wow. That's pretty cool in my book. I'm just trying to think of all of the things that could go wrong coordinating a whole fleet of drones in the sky and how important that observability data is.
Yep,
What a
yep.
production.
There's
Well,
some early versions of the work we were doing and on YouTube when we demoed the very first cut of the solution, um, which are good for a chuckle.
oh, we will have to dig those up and share those. I would love to take a look at those. Well, we've started talking about Fluent Bit, but the real big reason we're here today, Phil, is because you have written a wonderful book on the topic. And I am curious, this is not your first book. This is not your first book about logging or about Fluent. So what was the driving force behind bringing this new kind of refreshed copy to everybody?
So, the, to be honest, Eduardo's to blame for a lot of it. Uh, when I was a couple of years back, I was working on a book around Fluentd. That's what I was primarily using with a number of customers, and saw that it's not too difficult to get to grips with, but the art of the possible a lot of people miss. So I wanted to try and express that idea and take people from zero to doing some very, very nice stuff with it. And I got talking with Eduardo through the community, and the pitch was, why not do a book on Fluent Bit? At the time, I'd just finished the Fluentd book, and I was a little bit at the end of those projects. You kind of breathe out, and wasn't quite ready to take on another book project, to be honest. And then
Fair. It's not an
about
easy feat. These things do not write themselves,
no,
especially technical books.
yeah. And then about 18 months ago, you could really, maybe about 2 years ago, you could really see the Fluent Bit starting to hit the mainstream and take off big time. At which point I was like, actually, do you know what? I've got itchy fingers. Um, and I persuaded Manning that there was a case now. I could show them numbers of the adoption that Manning decided were good enough to justify the investment. So that's when we started.
I love it. Well, thank you, Eduardo, for planting that seed a couple years back, and now we have watered it, and this book is ready to go. And you've talked about, so the first book covers Fluentd primarily, right? It focuses on sort of the parent project. And for folks who are not familiar with the relationship between Fluentd and Fluent Bit, there can kind of be some confusion about why do I see Fluentd when I'm reading Fluent Bit documentation? What is the spillover, if any? What are the philosophies and what's different and what's the same? So how do you see the relationship between Fluent Bit and Fluentd? And for those of us who are joining just for using Fluent Bit, what do we need to know about Fluentd? What's important to learn about the history here?
So that's in my book. I would describe them as siblings.
Siblings.
Fluentd, yes. Fluent Bit is the younger sibling, um, but it stands up on its own 2 feet and can hold its own now. It's certainly no longer sort of in Fluentd's shadow,
Hmm.
uh, and its genesis is a little bit different. I'm telling Eduardo's story here to an extent because it's got a smaller, tighter footprint. It
Hmm.
lends itself a little bit better to be running in microservices and small footprint environments. I mean, if you're putting these things into containers, you want it to be as small and as efficient as possible, and Fluent Bit compared to Fluentd is that much better for size. So it lends itself well. Um, but there's some common concepts that at the 10,000 foot level, if you like, the
Hmm.
idea of observability is true to both, and they are interoperable, which is the nice thing. So if you've
Oh,
got a landscape that's Fluentd at the moment, then transitioning and adopting Fluent Bit isn't a case of going back and starting again. It's
cool.
you can plug them in pretty seamlessly, and if you've got a blend or you've got challenges that you find that you can solve more easily with Fluent D, then there's nothing stopping you mixing the two up.
I love that. Use what works best in your environment for your use cases. Eduardo, what should folks like me, as I'm entering the world of telemetry pipelines, I'm starting with Fluent Bit. What is important for folks like me to understand about Fluentd? What should we pay homage to? Are there any concepts that bled over? I read in the book there were some things we said, "Oops, we're gonna just start from scratch from here." So what should folks keep in mind? How should we consider the two?
Yeah, so if you are a Fluentd user and you have some basic concepts around what is a pipeline, a data source, data collection, filtering, routing, buffering, all those kind of the basic concepts that you need to understand to use it, I
Yeah.
think you will find that there's no big difference in Fluentd from that. Actually, Fluentd pretty much copied the same design of Fluentd, right?
Okay. Yeah.
But in a way that the concepts of how the telemetry data is taken, how the data is serialized internally, how this data is encoded back to a different format, and so on. But of course, we did it in our own way, considering that performance matters, considering that we might be running in a system which we don't have enough CPU, we don't have enough memory, and we need to make sure that we can be able to run, ship the data as fast as possible, process this very fast, but considering that resources are limited. And I think that if you transition from Fluentd to Fluentd today, you might notice that Fluentd is very hungry in resources, right? In CPU and memory. And that's fine, right? It was created for certain type of technology at the
Yes.
moment. The workloads were not like as today, right? So maybe that's performance
Yes.
penalty were not seen at that moment. And
Right.
actually, one side note, the creator of Fluentd, Sada, who is one of the co-founders of Treasure Data, yeah, he told me recently, I think it was 1, 2 years ago, I don't know where, and he told me, oh, you know, the truth is like, I wanted to write Fluentd in C++. The thing
Okay.
is that I started creating the POC in Ruby.
So it goes.
Yeah, and people started creating extension stuff, so it never was written in C++. However, however, the internals like message pack, he created message pack, right? It's a C
Okay.
library for data serialization, and yeah, we use the same thing internally. So Fluentd has its C components, right? But everything on
Yes.
top of that for to synchronize data collection, processing, and stuff, yeah, it's made in Ruby. And yeah,
Right.
Ruby is just a single thread, single process. You can scale that, but it has its own challenges. And
Yes.
maybe for today workflows, it's not ideal language for a service type application, right? And
Mhm.
but yeah, and Fluent Bit was designed for more performance. So configuration is different in Fluentd and Fluent Bit. You will notice that despite you have the same concept, Fluentd is XML. Here is like a mix of Python style coding with any type of Windows configuration, right? And those
Yes.
concepts come from a while back from another project, and now Fluent Bit, yeah, you had to read the book, right? You can configure
Yes.
it.
Yes. We're not giving away the whole book in this webinar. You still got to read it. You're getting just a taste today.
Yeah, at least. And the other is like one of the problems that we wanted to solve in Fluentd is like in Fluentd we found there's a lot of fragmentation, right? If you wanted
Yes.
to consume Fluentd, yeah, you have small core, 1,000 plugins, but all those plugins lives in a Ruby Gems website, right? So you had to build it,
Oh.
and if you had to deploy that in a package, right, you need to you create your own container. But at some point, those dependencies, those packages, and that stuff, gets updated. You get security issues, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
pain to maintain that over time. And I'm seeing that same mistake that was no, it's not a mistake, right? It was the right call at the moment, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
they made a mistake. I see other projects taking the same path. I'm a bit freaked out about that. But however, in Fluent Bit, we took the stance like, hey, let's try to have as less dependencies possible. If we,
Yes.
for example, if we need an HTTP client, okay, let's write one, right?
I
And
love
have
that.
APIs, our own stuff. And today, if you get Fluent Bit, yeah, you get all the plugins are available, like 100.
Yes.
You can use external plugin, that's fine. And yeah, so configuration is different, performance is better. There's a learning curve, yes, there is. We need better documentation. Thanks to Phil, we have a great book now. We didn't have before. One thing is a technical documentation, and the other is like, hey, how to accomplish XYZ, what do you need to learn? This is how you deploy.
Yes.
I think it's a different experience. So
Totally. Oh my gosh, so many fun history nuggets in there. We will have to chat with a little bit later. But I think this book is great for a book club. If you got a technical book club at your company, I think reading and learning together as a team or all the back-end engineers or what have you, I think learning together in community is a great way if you're rolling out Fluent Bit at the company to get started. Because Phil, in this book, we have a chapter from zero to hello world, and that chapter alone will get you up and running and finding your way around Fluent. But before we even get into that, at the beginning of the book, Phil, you said Fluent Bit is at its heart a specialized event capture and distribution tool. And I had not heard it described that way before. I had kind of heard telemetry pipeline and data processing, but not event capture and distribution tool. And that sounds like pretty specific phrasing. Can you share more about what this means to you?
Yes, so it probably is somewhat influenced by my background where I've come from an integration domain. So I tend to look at the world as pipelines and events of different types.
Sure.
And essentially what you can do with Fluent Bit is plug in, connect a vast range of sources, and you're not trying to do these things, or it's better not doing them in batch. Logs have been generated line at a time, so why not capture them at a line at a time? And now you're talking about events now. A little bit of logic is executed, it's generated a log or a metric or a trace, um, and it's emitted that. So why leave it there? Why not just grab it, which
Hmm.
is the collection, and get it to somewhere where we can actually extract a lot of meaning from it. Um, what I love about both the Fluent products is the focus on doing one thing and doing one thing well, which is getting that data out of the system, whether that's in a container or it's a legacy application, and getting it into a tool that's really suited to actually mining the data or visualizing it. I mean, we all tend to default to Grafana for visualizing a lot of our metrics and things like that. Um, and it's a great tool for visualization. So,
Yeah, sure.
don't try and compete with that. It's just too good at that job. But what Grafana doesn't do so well is collect the information. So let's get that data flowing to it so we get the maximum value. So now we've got effectively that pipeline or event stream. And that's where sort of the language that I've come to it from, because that's not different from an event-driven integration solution. You've got a
No.
source application needs to talk to another application. Your event-driven engine is all about getting it from A to B and understanding how to do it and why. So
Yep, and that principle, do one thing and do it well. I know OpenTelemetry often gets asked, what about a query language? How can I visualize this stuff? And they say, we are here for instrumentation, we're here for protocol, and we're here for helping you get from A to B. And that's it. The storage, the querying, the viz, there are other tools for that. This is enough of a job. And it sounds like the focus that Fluent has on let's get data, let's make sure we can send it to the right places. Let's do some manipulations. A to B, that's what we're in charge of. And then B to C, that's on you. um, Perfect, because event can be somewhat of an overloaded term in technology. Some people, if you've heard the MELT acronym, metrics, events, logs, and traces, some people say a log is an event is a log, and then Fluent also has the concepts of records. So when you talk about the event capture and distribution tool, you mean that, correct me if I'm wrong, in the kind of generic, the event is any type of telemetry since Fluent can handle metrics, logs, and of course traces. Event doesn't seem to be a special telemetry type in this context. Is that
that's right.
right? Okay.
It's very much a catch-all banner. What's important is that event has the connotations of it's something fairly small and discrete, and we tend to think about events as moving through an environment. We pass an event around. We don't just whack it into a big bucket and wait
Yeah.
until the end of the month to go and collect whatever's there. So that's why I tend to use the language of events. It also allows us to cover, lots of different ideas. You mentioned the traces and the logs and the metrics. They're all different kinds of events,
Yes.
and are trying to associate them under a banner. And I'm sure sooner or later someone will come along and create a slight variation of that
Uh-huh.
concept. It's still an event.
Yes. That is sort of my observability philosophy is events are things that happened and it can describe the implementation of an event can be a metric, it can be a trace or a span, it can be a log. But yeah, that is also how I see events. Before we hop to the next question, Eduardo, are there any other ways you've seen folks describe Fluent Bit aside from telemetry pipeline, that we should bring up for folks who are just dipping their toes into this world? What other search terms might they use to find out more about Fluent Bit?
Oof. Well, the project has been running for almost 10 years.
Oh
Next
my
year,
gosh,
since it was created. And it's a lot. So that's been a long
that's
journey.
major.
Yeah, and I would say that, for example, if we look backward 6 years ago, it used to be
Okay.
called a log forwarder.
A
You have
log.
this concept of forwarder, right? Because in the way that you deploy this tool, it might have a name, right? So if you sit it on the edge where the data is being generated, it was called a forwarder because it takes the data and forward that to some place.
Makes
And
sense.
also we got the concept of aggregator, right? The aggregator is, well, a central
Okay.
place where this data is being received by the forwarder, right? Today,
Got
a
it.
could be like the collector, right? It's the same thing, but it's the same tool that you deploy in different ways for different architecture, different patterns, right? Forwarder, aggregator, the log agent. We used to do only logs a couple of years ago, and
Okay.
then we expanded to metrics, traces, profiling is coming to.
Ah,
See, there's a lot of things are coming up. So. And I think that those terms are going to evolve based on the use case, right? And I think that now, since we go beyond logs, our use cases are kind of, we get more a wider scope of challenges that we can solve and different needs, and not just telemetry, right? For example, Phil. Phil is somebody from the Groundswell team that, if I'm not wrong, he runs Fluent Bit in one of his 3D printers to collect the metrics. I don't know how he do
Oh
that.
my gosh. Okay, we're gonna have to find him and chat with him. I
Yeah,
love wild use cases like that, or just non-standard. Okay, you could use
yes,
Fluent Bit in everyday life at home.
yeah. So it's like load collector, and we never got all those terms of like a queue or a kind of a broker system, nothing like that,
Okay.
right? Yeah, that yeah.
So if you are looking for information and you come across some, as this project has been going on for almost a decade, you may look for things like, yeah, log forwarder, log aggregator. There may be some great blog posts out there about Fluent that just happen to use those terms instead of what is rising in popularity today, telemetry pipeline, or I love Phil, the event capture and distribution tool, event driven, that might get you some good hits as well. Now, we are, as much as I would love to talk about Fluent Bit for gardening, for 3D printers, for car telemetry, we're here to talk about Fluent Bit with Kubernetes. So, when it comes to telemetry from Kubernetes, I can think of logs coming from the applications themselves, the pods, the logs coming from the nodes that those pods are running on, that's running all those containers. And then a whole other layer of logs from Kubernetes itself. Is it doing orchestration well? How is that going? So, Phil, can FluentBit handle logs from all of those sources? Can it help make sense of everything that's going on top to bottom in that system?
Yes, I mean, Fluent Bit itself, at its heart, really doesn't care whether it's Kubernetes, it's the node, or it's the application. They are, at their essence, logs or events, metrics, or so on. The challenge comes is how you interact with it and collect it and what you're allowed to do. Um,
Hmm,
so, at a very simple level, it's straightforward. It's just another application. Or not, you could yeah. These days, we often start to think about Kubernetes as being an operating system. That's the
totally.
layer that we first contact with these days. Um, and the secret sauce is how is that environment, how is that Kubernetes being configured, and what are you allowed to do? So, a lot of people don't, well, we use Minikube or K3S or something like that for our local development, which is
Sure,
easy to hack around in the lower layers. But when it comes to production level solutions, we're into the world quite often of cloud vendors or opinionated implementations of Kubernetes like OpenShift.
sure.
And now you're into a place where they don't always want you digging around at the lower levels, and nor do you
Yes.
necessarily want to, because the whole point of taking an OpenShift or using a cloud vendor for Kubernetes is they're sorting all those problems out for you.
Yes. I
So
used to say I will pay the Google SREs to be on call for the control plane. I am happy to be responsible for my apps running there, but y'all can handle Kubernetes.
exactly, and we're slowly moving up the scale and doing more and more leaning on the third party, and that's where things get really interesting because the question becomes, how do I tap into it? What are my options available? Because I can't just go install Fluentbit as a native executable on the infrastructure because that's hidden from you by the vendor.
Sure.
So we can use plugins now. There are certain strategies out there, some better than others. And certainly some of the approaches will depend on your opinion. I'm a great advocate of using the sidecar approach because
Uh,
that means my world for dealing and monitoring my application at least is inside the pod. As a
yes.
result, I don't care. My monitoring of my application, I don't care how I'm deployed, you
Yep.
know? So, and that makes it easy. And all of that time, because I'm deployed with my application, I have context. My application environment is my context. You can sit outside of the pod, and a lot of people swear by the idea that you just write the standard out and you have to capture it. The
Yes.
downside of that, of course, now is that you've got lots of pods all writing out and you're capturing it further out. So you've now got to sort out all of those events again to say, well, that actually originated with that pod that's doing this job. So you've got to rework out the structure, which means from an application development perspective, you've got to understand the relationship between pods and applications, which is to an extent you're starting to sort of blur the lines between your observability suite and your application. The two are getting tied together very tightly,
Yes.
particularly as you push things towards your analysis platforms. So for me, I prefer not to do that, but that approach of listening into the output of Kubernetes nodes is the way to therefore get listening to your Kubernetes environment. Of course, some of the vendors have provided plugins as well, so they'll expose to you what they want you or allow you to see that's going on.
Yes. Their
So,
view into the system. That's fair.
yeah.
I like the sidecar approach. I think with the sidecar approach, another small benefit is that as a developer, you can become more, you write it, you run it, you observe it. You can be more in control of what your pipeline looks like. If you had to use some logging library that maybe doesn't format or structure things in the best way, and you don't have the time to fix it from source, or some library you've imported has chosen interesting logging choices. If you've got that sidecar, you're in control of your little config that's just going to affect your logs. I think that's a nice level of ownership at the app level. Of course, SREs are going to want to care about the whole system. How can we normalize everything? But at least for app developers, if you know how to write your own telemetry pipelines just to modify your own application's telemetry, I think you're in a great place. I think that's where we should be. You write it, you run it, you observe it. um, Now with Kubernetes, because this book focuses so heavily on Kubernetes, I get the impression managing logs and telemetry in Kubernetes is different than some environments of the other environment types that folks are used to working with. What makes Kubernetes so different to have this beautiful book out in the world? What is it the challenges? Is it the volume? I can imagine there's a lot going on.
So there is the volume is definitely an aspect of it because we're now trying to take advantage of this containerization to increase the density of work on any bit of infrastructure. So volume goes up. You have got to deal with, particularly if you're tapping into the standard out style approaches of how does Kubernetes orchestrate or schedule your container, your pod, because it can shift it around, it can tear it down when
Oh,
it
it
thinks
will.
it's right, and it will do so if it's not happy. So you've got to be very mindful of that, and that changes how you have to approach your observability strategies. You have to think a little bit harder about that because if you just go the classic route, when we're in the world of virtualization or
Mhm.
running on bare metal, we might just say, oh yeah, we'll write to the logs, and if we're 5, 10 minutes behind the logs, so what? In the world of Kubernetes, 5 or 10 minutes where you lose a chunk of log information and probably all the details about why Kubernetes decided something was not right about your container, your pod. So it's torn it down and said, oh, that's not healthy. I can see that. And you've lost all the evidence of it. So all of a
Oh,
sudden you've got to think about how to solve that problem. You either, as I suggest, the sidecar approach, and you constantly pulling every few seconds the latest log entries that are being generated, or you do things like mount a persistent volume and you use that to put all your logs, but that entails other complexities in configuration.
totally.
Whilst the idea of logging is no different, the way you approach it has to be a lot more aware of the dynamics of things popping up and disappearing. And what happens when you start scaling your application up? you put Kida in it, and that's driving Kubernetes to create more and more instances of a pod. How do you know which pod's generating which messages?
Mm, pod ID. It comes to mind,
So
but
yeah,
I understand. Um, the dynamic nature. I almost wish I had been in technology for the days of I have a VM and I know its name and I know the server it's running on. That is so not the case with Kubernetes. So what I heard was Kubernetes, the act of orchestration, being that symphony conductor, moving, bin packing, making sure pods are in the right place and up to spec and quality of service means if you want to understand why Kubernetes did what it did with your pods in your app, you have to have this telemetry. And because 5 to 10 minutes in the world of Kubernetes is like an eternity, so many things could be happening in what feels like a small chunk of time, and maybe in the older style of the world. That is why you need to be able to get those logs not only out of the system from each layer of component, but somewhere that can tell you, hey, we're in a crash loop back off. Hey, there was no space on the node. That sort of things. It's that dynamic nature. If you, as a human, want to know what's going on, you've got to be able to reconstruct that timeline of events.
yeah, exactly,
All right.
exactly.
And when I think of Kubernetes telemetry from Kubernetes itself, I have come across mostly just they use the word event as a type of telemetry, as in like a log. So I think of the crash loop backoff, I think of node not ready. Kubernetes itself calls that an event. When we are ingesting that into Fluent Bit, we're calling that a record or sort of the generic event. Is this where that term event gets a little confusing?
It's certainly one case where events become a little bit confusing. We're talking about what Kubernetes sees as an event, or we're talking more generically. Uh,
Little, yeah, capital E event versus little e.
yeah,
Interesting. And Eduardo, when it came, I had read Fluent Bit had started out as a project for edge devices, but really found its home in Kubernetes, handling Kubernetes telemetry and data. And it's not often that using technology not for the original use case works out. So do you have anything you'd like to share about how Fluent Bit works so well in Kubernetes? How even though it wasn't initially designed for a Kubernetes world, what made it such a great fit and integration there?
Yeah, I think that well, the answer is maybe mix different concepts. In technology, there's a good thing around, or when you create a company, right? It's about timing and the problem that you're solving. I think that by things of life, we were solving ahead of time, or focusing on one product that, for example, not one market, not one product, like has constrained environments. We need to make sure that it works fast, right? And at that time, for anybody who maybe is in the audience, oh, why you didn't write it in Go or any other language, right? It's really in C, right? Go for ARM at that time was not quite good, right? It was
Mm,
just starting, right? 2015, 2015.
okay. Yep, there we go.
Yeah, Rust didn't exist at that time, I think.
Oh my gosh,
So
no. Oh.
yeah, so and the thing is that when we envisioned this project, and yeah, we started to build like a small collector for metrics from the kernel because it just was just for Linux, right? So we created plugins for serial interface, the kernel log messages, std out, the forward protocol, which is a Fluentd, because the original vision was let's sit this on the edge, make it a forward, and send data to Fluentd.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. And then when well, Kubernetes was just getting out almost at the same time, Prometheus was around, and there was this need for observability, sorry, to collect and process data, telemetry data, and Fluentd was the best pick for that. We donated Fluentd to the CNCF, right? But
Nice.
after people started to ask, oh, we know that there's Fluent Bit around. Why is this for embedded devices? Can you add a plugin to read log files because we didn't have a tail plugin at the beginning. It
No
did come
kidding. Oh my gosh.
2 years later, right? It was like,
Wow.
actually, to be honest, somebody at the company at that moment was Kyoto told me, hey, why you don't write a tail plugin? I was like, this is for embedded, we don't need it. Right? Yeah, it was needed, right? And then somebody told me, oh, why you don't write the Kubernetes filter?
Okay, okay.
Okay, Kubernetes filter, what is Kubernetes, how this works, blah, 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 blah. And we started adding all the components at the same time that Fluentd was being developed. Fluent Bit, it started creating its own path, starting adding all this functionality. But I think that there are three things that we never sacrifice in the process. Is like maybe the core values of the project was like high performance, low resource consumption, and highly integrable. So you can integrate it with things, even competitors. I think that and that the piece of integration comes from Fluentd because we saw that Fluentd was becoming successful, not because we wanted to sit and say, "Hey, I'm the king of the world. You have to use Fluentd and deprecate Logstash." It was not like that. The strategy, for example, at that time, I mixed the concept here, like Fluentd to beat Logstash was not to create better future, was to integrate with Logstash, integrate with Elastic, and make Fluentd a better Logstash alternative, right? And we took the same
Yes.
approach with Fluent Bit. Okay, let's not waste time thinking about other alternatives. Let's integrate with different protocols, source destination, and start adding processing. And processing comes later, but we didn't have filters, right? I think that the first filter was grep and then the Kubernetes filter because we were a forwarder. We read data and we send data.
Wow. Okay. There is so much fascinating history there. So, what I heard was there were two very important people that asked very important questions that help build the features that made FluentBit such a great fit for handling Kubernetes. So, when you have ideas, you should tell your maintainers. You should tell the folks working on the project because you don't know what beautiful world we could all be living in. And it sounds like this interoperability between open source observability solutions is not new, is that Fluent has been leading the charge in that from the get-go. And I think that's such an important design philosophy and value to say you do not have to work within our closed ecosystem. I mean, the whole point of a pipeline, it's open on both ends, right? You can send and receive from anywhere, send and receive to anything. And that is also probably what has made this project so enduring is working with everybody, interoperating. Because gosh knows you have more than one observability tool at your organization. That is, odds are good you've got like upwards of 5. So being able to have one place to talk to all of those, gather from all of those is almost essential today. We've
Yes.
got, oh, go
One
ahead.
thing that you said one interesting point is like was about feedback from the community. I mean, the first to recognize that 90% of what you see in Fluentd today is thanks to the community. Yeah, sometimes we maintainers write the code, community writes some code, but most of this feedback come from people from the field that is struggling with the problem, and they say, "Hey, I'm using this. It's great for this, and honestly, it sucks for this." Okay, how we and the feedback is like that, right? That's why going to this conference, KubeCons or KCD or other type of conference is really important because you can understand and learn what are the challenges, right? And for example, let me give you
Yes.
a quick story because one of the favorite plugins of Phil was Lua, right? I don't know if you know the story of Lua, how this gets started, right? We supported a bunch of plugins. We were in KubeCon Europe, I don't know, a couple of years ago when GDPR, this stuff for security and data information in Europe started. I just delivered my talk at KubeCon about talking about Fluentd and FluentBit. Then we were in a booth, and it was a Fluent booth, open source booth, and then came to us like 8 people. We took a photo. We tried to find that photo, and that moment they told us, "Hey, we love FluentBit, but we have a special use case. We need a plugin that can have conditionals. So if the data in the record comes in this way, I can take different actions or modify the data in certain ways." And what's the use case? Oh, well, we process transactions, so every record contains the credit card numbers,
Cool.
and
Yeah.
we need to take a different processing logic if the credit card number is for Visa, Amex, or MasterCard. And for
Hmm.
like, okay, write your own plugin, buddy. It's very costly. But if you abstract from that, and we were brainstorming between all of us how to approach this, I remember at that moment, hey, there's this Lua language. It's using an Nginx to do these conditionals and allows to do conditionals routing on an Nginx. Why we don't do Lua stuff in Fluent Bit, right? Because on that way, if you extract from the user need, what they basically wanted to have is a way to bring their business logic into Fluent Bit, right?
Yes.
But you cannot tell them write a plugin in C or write a plugin in Go. They needed something more high level that people can understand and maybe not compile it. And that's where the filter Lua was born, right?
Wow. Oh, this is just yet another sign that you give all feedback. I mean, give the positive feedback. We could never hear enough nice things about the work we do, but also share what's not working, share what you need, because those three questions really drove some of the core, what we consider today, core capabilities of Fluent Bit. I love that. We are approaching the end of our time today, and I want to make sure we get to your questions. And we have one in the queue already. We will get started with Christoph. Thank you. How does Fluent Bit compare to the OpenTelemetry collector? Great question. Phil, you wrote the book on Fluent Bit. Have you played with OpenTelemetry collector? Do you have thoughts here?
Are you right on the collector now or not? Not yet.
I'm not.
I just wanted the next seat.
So I've played with it a bit. The challenge I found with the OpenTelemetry collector is it's less flexible when it comes to legacy environments.
Mm,
If you've got we're not all born cloud native as application development, and a lot of organizations have legacy solutions, and the collector just, for me at least, didn't feel so easy to get it in and hook into the legacy environments. I love the idea that OpenTelemetry is built, and that's historically there used to be three different open standards, or many more than that, but three that were being driven and cultivated under the CNCF. And what they did was say, hey, look, they're all working towards a similar problem. Let's bring them together. The genesis of how OpenTelemetry standard handled logs came from Fluentd. Now, the definition is evolved,
sure.
but some of the basic ideas in there are actually Fluentd based. Then you got the header OpenMetrics that became part of OpenTelemetry.
Yep.
So it coalesced and it's made a lot of sense. But it just doesn't, for me at least, it's not quite as flexible and adaptable as Fluent Bit. So
sure. I definitely agree. I love the I think the word is co-opetition as opposed to competition. I do credit OTel a lot with the setting up the schema, getting not only the cloud providers, but the observability vendors, and of course the end users all together to figure out what we need for these open standards. And I think my personal opinion is the OTel collector is started out because tracing was the first kind of full baked signal thanks to open tracing. OpenTelemetry collector, great at manipulating traces, but logs for OTel are, I mean, I know profiles are in the works, but logs were the last of the three big types of telemetry to land. And so it makes sense that it might be a little bit clunkier or a lot has to be worked out where Fluent started with logs, then we added those other signals. So when it comes to logs, it's kind of hard to beat Fluent Bit. But Eduardo, I am sure you've got an opinion to weigh in here. Have you played with the OTel collector? What have you found are the big differences there?
Yeah, I have used the OTel collector to compare our implementation. Okay, and maybe for the audience for who's not familiar, there's OpenTelemetry, the project that has the schema, definitions, standards, instrumentation libraries that also have another project called inside the same project called OpenTelemetry Collector, which is implementation of these schemas, right?
Yes.
So if you want to experience OpenTelemetry, You just need to use a compliant OpenTelemetry tool, library, or agent, right? On this way, Fluent Bit is also an OpenTelemetry compliant agent. We can receive OTLP, we can send out OTLP, we can process the data. So Fluent Bit is fully OpenTelemetry compatible. But if you take it from a competition perspective, I said, yeah, Fluent Bit is in the side by side with the collector, not OpenTelemetry per se. So the
Yes.
collector. And I think that okay, if you I'm going to talk from feedback from users, right? So most of users are using FluentBit, so the agent sits already in their machines in their environment. Adding an external agent, an external component, of course, adds its own complexities, no matter which one it is, right? So, and most of the question that we get from a community perspective is like, hey, I'm solving this problem with this other agent. Can you replicate that functionality inside FluentBit? And most of the time, yes. Or, for
Nice.
example, we ended up kind of rewriting or copy pasting Prometheus node exporter inside FluentBit as a plugin, right? We
Sure.
rewrote
Yeah.
everything, copy the same metric descriptions, everything, right? So people now can use just one single agent. Now, when it's about, for example, if you compare with the collector, I think that we have our very well-defined values. And I can speak as a maintainer. I cannot speak for auto collector because I'm not a maintainer of OpenTelemetry. But from Fluent side, we care about performance, we care about reliability, we care about vendor neutrality, right?
Yes.
And why I speak about that, because in any project that's starting to grow and companies start to emerge their forces of politics around projects, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that in Fluent we have a less political project that allow us to move faster or implement things without major hassle. While we
Mm-hmm.
see that others, yes, there's more process, there's more companies involved, which is good. I
Yes.
think that each one has its own taste, but you might see that people who's new to cloud native and is going want to experience open telemetry, yeah, and they're willing to instrument the applications and everything. Yeah, they use the collector, right?
Sure.
Yes, use the same
Yeah.
stuff, it would work. It will work, right? But at some point, we say, hey, if you're struggling with performance or other stuff, hey, you might consider Fluent Bit, which has pretty much similar capabilities, but it's more lightweight, scalable, and it has been in the field for more many years. So
Yes.
I would say that it's user's choice, right? And if the auto collector is working fine for you, hey, use it.
Yeah.
Right? Don't look for a replacement because I'm saying that or because Phil wrote that Fluent Bit book, right? I think that everybody it's good to have choices. And at the end of the day,
Yes.
if you go to any production environment or big corporations, small corporations, you don't have just one technology. Never.
No.
You have
No,
one.
no, no.
You have Redis, you have MySQL, you have PostgreSQL, right? And the same thing happens with other infrastructure components, right?
Totally.
So I can speak for Fluent. We care about performance, integration, vendor neutrality. But yeah, we care about that Fluent Bit can speak to the collector, and we care about that the collector can
Yes.
speak to Fluent Bit.
Yeah, you don't have to choose. You can mix and match. And the best thing you can do, try them both out in your environment, in your context, run the benchmarks for your system and see what's going to work for you. We are, oh my gosh, almost at the end of time. We will do one last lightning round question. What would you like to see from Fluent Bit in the coming years? We, of course, have talked about all of the wonderful things it can do today, but you both have spent a lot of time with it. What would you like to see in the next year or so? Phil, we'll start with you.
Well, I would have said a month ago, eBPF, that's coming up and becoming quite an influential framework
Oh,
for
yeah.
inspecting low-level activities on infrastructure. Um, and I don't want to steal Eduardo's thunder, but I believe there are some things in the pipeline in that space. So
Mm.
I kind of not sure what to suggest next.
Fluent Bit, making your dreams become a reality. I love it. Well, we'll take eBPF as a great answer. Eduardo, what would you like to see?
Yeah, well, before answer, Phil, there's a PR that I just shared on the chat, which was made by Jorge from Chronosphere. He just created an eBPF collector. So
Look
we
at
will
that.
handed for version 3.2 that will launch at KubeCon. So yeah, so I think that's the first entry point, and then we need to learn about use cases. Now, what I would like to see, um, that one thing that not struggle but would like to solve is the developer experience or DevOps experience with Fluent Bit, right?
Yes.
As a very flexible tool, the best way to extend it is by knowing C language.
Oh,
However,
okay. It's a little barrier for some of us.
it's a very many faults these times, right? So yeah, we support Golang, input plugins in Golang. We support Lua
I could do
filters.
Go. Okay.
Yeah. We support Wasm, so you can compile your Python code to Wasm and run it in Fluent Bit. However, the experience around performance, we lose performance, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Personally, I'm not happy about it. So, and there, I have seen a lot of interest in, hey, what type of solution we can come up with to build this bridge where, hey, you can extend it and the performance penalty will be minimal, right? And I
We want
think,
the best of both worlds.
yes, exactly. Yeah. It's like you can run a Linux kernel and run whatever you want on top of it, right? We want to get that experience. So I am not experimenting, but I will try to dig more into the Zig language, ZIG, right?
Ah, yes.
Pretty early stage language has been around for a couple of years, but it's very early. And I think that could be the right answer for this thing. Of course, this needs a POC, learn more about language
Yes.
with the users, with the community. And yeah, I would like to solve the problem. The first thing that I have for the next year for KubeCon Europe, when we release Fluent Bit 4
Hmm.
next year, it will be have SIG support. And of
Oh
course,
my goodness.
I
Stay
know
tuned.
too mainstream today, but hey, it seems like we like to be ahead of time a little bit.
Ahead of the curve. I love it. Well, thank you both so much for the conversation today. We covered a lot of ground. Everybody, yeah, please give your applause, throw it in the chat for Phil and Eduardo.